dear friends in Christ, pastor and teacher and writer John Ortberg tells the story of his grandmother, who was one of the nicest and kindest and most gentle ladies that he had ever known, until it came time for things like board games and card games and especially Monopoly, in which case Pastor Ortberg says she turned into a different person. Especially when it came to Monopoly, he said she was a take-no-prisoners Monopoly player, ruthless to everybody. And she tended to win all the time. And so he goes on and said obviously they played a lot, and he always wanted to beat his grandmother in Monopoly. But what happened was, the summer that he was 10 years old, he had a friend across the street. And they'd play Monopoly all day, all summer. And he said he learned about Monopoly that summer. So one day, toward the end of that summer, he sat down with his family and his grandmother. And that was the day. That was the day he won. He said he didn't just win. He destroyed his grandmother at Monopoly. And as he sat there and as she finally capitulated and surrendered and looked across the board, he's looking there. He has all the hotels. He's got all the money. He's the master of the game. And he reports his grandmother looked at him and said, "Congratulations. Now it all goes back in the box." It's okay to play to win in life. That's all right. But as we play to win in life, we need to remember, in the end, it all goes back in the box. You're going to hear, and Pastor Short has mentioned our What If campaign. You're going to hear more this week in your mailboxes about the ministry opportunities that present ourselves and presented before us at St. Andrew. If, as Pastor Short said, what if we could pay off this debt? What if we had $85,000 to spend on ministry opportunities? You're going to hear more about that as it comes this week in this debt retirement campaign that we're beginning on this Sunday as you start hearing about it. But it's not simply about a debt retirement. And if that's what you're hearing, you're gonna miss, because it's about ministry opportunities, but it's about what we also I'm calling life stewardship. How do we live our lives? And how do we live every area of our lives? Because that's what Pastor Ortberg, John Ortberg, in his book, When the Game is Over, It All Goes Back in the Box. That's what he's talking about. Life stewardship. How do we live our lives? I'm going to put a pause button on here a second. We have some copies, at least we did earlier this morning. We have some copies of this book on the table out there, and then as you're walking out. If you'd like one of these, feel free to grab one. It's probably cost us about $10 if you can afford it. If you can't, don't worry about it. Go ahead and take it. We've got some small supply. If we run out of them, we'll get more. It's one of those things. We can get more of these. Because it talks about, what Pastor Ortberg is talking about is this life stewardship that goes on. And the thing I want to talk to you this morning about is keeping score. And how you keep score in life. Because in Monopoly, it's easy, right? As you're sitting there playing Monopoly, it's easy to keep score. You look around the board and you say, who's got the most hotels and who's got the biggest stack of money? But how do we keep score in life? And there's many ways that we keep score in life. Forbes magazine every year puts out the magazine, The 100 Richest Men in the World. Those men that have so many zeros behind their name, those of us mere mortals lose count of how many zeros they got behind their net worth. Right? Various magazines will put out lists of all kinds of different lists. The most powerful men and women in every place from Hollywood to Washington, D.C., and everything in between. Magazines will put out lists of the most beautiful women and the beautiful men in the world. This is our list, by the way. Okay. But it's not just this. Students compare test scores. High school students compare ACTs. We compare ourselves. We compete against ourselves. Our financial planners and our retirement people will tell you you've got to have the number to retire, right? That number you need to have your standard of living when you retire. That's our scorecard. How are you doing against your number? How's your bike account doing? How's your IRA? How's your 401k? All those things we try to keep score with. And I must admit to you, pastors are not immune to this. You go to pastors' conferences and you sit there and you're in there. It doesn't take too long in the conference. Somebody's coming up to you and saying, so how's your church doing? That's not necessarily just a general information. How's your church doing? That's a question. I got something to brag about. That's my lead line. Or what's your membership now? And there's this unspoken competition. The bigger the church, the higher on the pastoral rung you stand. It's competition. We keep score that way. Yes, even pastors, we do that. And there's three ways that we keep score in life. As we're looking at this ladder, as John Ortberg talks about climbing the ladder, we compare where we're at with each other. We compare ourselves to each other. How are we alike? How are we different between the people around us? And it's interesting, he points out, he sits there and he says, it's interesting how when we start comparing ourselves financially to those around us, we're always seemingly comparing ourselves to someone who is slightly above where we are. That we've got comparing ourselves to somebody who's slightly above where we are, trying to reach up to that level. But if we're comparing ourselves on the issue of morality, we seemingly are comparing ourselves to those who are one step or two steps below us. And we say, well, I'm not as bad as that person. Comparing ourselves. The second one is competing with each other. The thrill of the competition, winning at all costs. There was a movie several years ago. One of the things about movies that are comedy movies, sometimes the comedy is comedy and sometimes the comedy has a ring of truth to it. There was a movie several years ago called Talladega Nights. I can't necessarily recommend the movie, but it's got a great line I'm going to tell you here in a second. Talladega Nights, and our lead character, it's a movie about stock car racing in the South. And he sits there as our lead character in the movie named Ricky Bobby, and he has a line goes in the movie. It says, if you're not winning, you're losing. And as soon as I heard it the first time, I thought, that's American society. If you're not winning, you're losing. The third one is climbing above. Trying to climb that ladder. To climb up that ladder rung by rung, so I'm better, I'm higher in whatever you're comparing yourself, whatever you're measuring, that I get up that ladder one more rung with the people around me and the people that are there. That's all fine and dandy, but we start doing scorekeeping this way, and scorekeeping this way will bring three things to us. Number one, it brings upon us envy. It brings upon us envy, and I call envy's first cousin coveting. It's that desire for more, always wanting something else, never being satisfied. And when this happens, envy and coveting come in, what happens is gratitude gets shoved out. Gratitude is that response of people who have been blessed by God. Attitude is the proper response of people who have been blessed materially, blessed with the Spirit, blessed with grace, blessed with all the multitude of blessings you hear us talk about with the blessings of God. Gratitude is that attitude of going out and sharing the blessings that God has given us. What happens is gratitude gets shoved out for the lust for more. Second one is jealousy. Jealousy begins to take over. It's jealousy at the winners. Winners and losers become labels. Winners and losers become classifications that people are put in, and this obsession with being on top begins to take over our lives. And the third one that is in our third problem that occurs is its cousin to these two. It's called arrogance. Especially when we start comparing ourselves. It says, well, I'm not as bad as that person. Arrogance comes in. Pastor Orberg talks again about climbing that ladder and going up and wanting to get ahead. And all these things that are going on in life. And he has a great line in here. He says in his book, the problem with spending your life climbing up the ladder is that you will go right past Jesus, for he's coming down. The problem with spending your life climbing up the ladder is you will go right past Jesus, for he's coming down. Coming down that ladder has a nice church word. It's one of those catechism phrases that our catechism students learn. It's called humiliation. Now, some of our catechism students might still have nightmares about it, but that's okay. And if you can't remember the word humiliation, you need to remember the concept. And the concept is simply this, is Jesus Christ, who is in very nature God, who was God himself. In all respects, Jesus Christ was God from before the creation of the world. Jesus Christ set that glory aside and came down here to live among us, to live for us, to die, and to rise. He gave that up to die and to rise for us. And Paul talks about that in our Poet's Corner this morning. Listen to it again. He says, talking about Jesus Christ, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. Essentially, just like I said, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. In other words, simply this, he is God. He is in the very nature God. He is God in all respects, the same as his Father. And he doesn't consider it something to be grasped. He gives it up, and Paul goes on and says, "But made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even death on a cross." Can you see him walking down the steps? And he gets to the bottom rung, and he steps off the ladder, and Paul repeats it just so we get it. He became obedient unto death, even death on a cross. Jesus' objective was not to climb the ladder. Jesus' objective wasn't to gain the glory. Jesus' objective wasn't to be on the top and to win the game. Jesus' objective was to come down here, get off the ladder, and get on a cross. That was his objective. That's what he came to do. He came to come down the ladder to die for us. And I like to say he comes down the ladder, gets off the ladder on the bottom rung and dies for us. But he also, in John chapter 13, there's another passage that talks about Jesus coming down the ladder and Jesus getting off the ladder and washing the disciples' feet. On the last night of Jesus' life, that Thursday evening, he comes and he gathers the disciples around him. And you're celebrating the Passover, and he washes their feet. I say this and I teach this, and I've come to the conclusion I can't teach this. Don't know how to convey it. I can't, in our 21st century world, figure out an illustration to tell you how demeaning a task that was that Jesus did. I've given up trying. And he goes down, and he does the lowest possible job, and he washes their feet. And he sits there, and after he washes their feet, John wants us to know, and John points out as he goes through and tells this story of three people, it's important we understand who got their feet washed. Number one, it says obvious one was the disciples got their feet washed. But in this story, John points out two other people who got their feet washed, just so we know what Jesus is doing and who he's doing it for. Jesus is washing, number one, it says Jesus washes Peter's feet. Peter, the guy who in a few hours in the time frame here, the guy in a few hours is going to say 3 times, "I don't know the man," and run away. And just so we get it, John also says in this passage that Jesus washes Judas's feet. Judas is there too. Jesus doesn't come down to wash the disciples' feet. Jesus doesn't come down to even wash the feet of the people who are on the bottom rung. Jesus comes down and serves and lives and dies for the people who can't even reach the bottom rung. And when he does, he says, as I have done for you, you should also do. You should also wash one another's feet. How that looks in your life, I don't know. We all have been given talents. We've all been given treasures. We've all been given time. We're all given 168 hours in a week. No more, no less to use for God. But we've been given different talents. We've been given different abilities to speak, to sing, the various talents of our life. We've been given different treasures in our life and the blessings of finances that God has given each one of us in our life. And Jesus says, go and wash one another's feet. Go and serve these people who can't reach the bottom rung. He says, everyone, but we say, admittedly, not everyone can do the same thing. That's not the point. Not everyone can do the same thing. The point is, everyone can do something. Not everyone can do the same thing, but everyone can do something. We wash feet as it's been given to us to wash feet. As we have that ability to serve God, we serve God. As we have that ability to help others, we help others. As we have that ability to go out and live that great commandment that Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. Not everyone can do the same thing, but everyone can do something. That's keeping score God's way. Amen.